Hello and welcome to Tugat, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Daniel Berhane. Daniel Berhane is an author of a recent book titled War on Tigray, Genocidal Axis in the Horn of Africa. We're going to briefly talk about that. And more generally, he's an activist and he's a commentator on Ethiopian politics. I think he has been a commentator on Ethiopian politics for the past 20 years. And he has, for the past 3 or 4 years, been stuck in Tigray following the Tigray war. And the Abiy Ahmed regime had put his name on a wanted list, wanted to be arrested or even to be killed. And so he's someone with a very deep knowledge of Ethiopian politics, and also he was someone who was, I think, one of the few people who warned of genocidal undercurrents in Ethiopian politics, because in his blog he had written about a genocidal call that one of the prominent Ethiopian journalists, Iskender Nega, had published in his I think either newspaper or magazine. I don't remember what it was, but Daniel, you will later correct me. So I think we have the pleasure of having someone who is deeply knowledgeable about Ethiopian politics, and he's going to give us his reflections of what has happened in Tigray and generally in Ethiopian politics. So I'm really immensely grateful for your time, Daniel, today, and welcome.
Like for the invitation and for your generous service. Of course, I have been active in Ethiopian politics and media for the past 2 decades, but the blogging, the online platform, it has been like 12 or 13 years. That's where I've been active in terms of online. But otherwise, I've been writing in newspapers and I have been active politically for the past 2 decades.
Good.
And
So
you're referring to was the those genocide calls for genocide published on Iskender Nega's newspaper in 19 European calendar. It will be like 2003, I think 2003 or 2004. And I republished them after digging from the archive. I republished them on Horn Affairs on a blog I was writing in 2013.
And those archives are still available, I believe, Daniel, the translation that you did from Amharic to English, or had they been wiped out?
Yeah, no, they are available online, but I put some excerpts, important excerpts on my book as well. I reproduce some of them so that they can be available for generation to come. But even the newspapers, they should be available in the archive as quite newspaper. Even myself, I found it after 10 years, because when I read it, I was in university when I read first those newspapers. Later on, I went to archives and I found it after looking for like hundreds of publications of newspapers. I ultimately found out, pinpointed the actual publication. That's when I translated it and published it online in 2013. But they should be available on other medias as well. I think it has been produced in a lot of places in the past 2 or 3 years, especially after the war started. I think a lot of people were trying to reprint them, those translations, but no, I don't know which online sites are those.
Well, I'm going to put a link to those archives, Daniel, because I think they are very, they are illuminating in terms of what the thinking was from the people and political entities that were determined to destroy Tigray, and generally there is a lot of I wouldn't say ignorance, but lack of awareness about the groundwork and preparation that they had been doing for a long time. And I think those archives are very important in that sense. So I'm going to put a link to them in the description box. And generally, we're going to maybe come back to them, and you're going to tell us a little bit about your book. And I have to hold my hands up from the beginning and say that I haven't read the book, so we're not going to discuss the book in detail today, but I'm going to have you back sometime later after I have read the book, and we're going to discuss it. But you, anyway, you're going to give us a little bit of a summary and maybe brief outline about the book towards the end, Danny. But for now, I'm going to start by asking you, Daniel, to give us your reflections about what happened in Tigray for the past 3 years, because you were there, like I said in my introduction, you were stuck and you were put on a hit list, really. And what was it like for you to find yourself totally cut off from Ethiopian politics, given that you had really been engaging in Ethiopian politics, and and to be in the situation that millions of Tigrayans were as well, totally cut off and forgotten? What was that like? Give us a picture of what that was like.
Well, I didn't say I was stuck in a sense, because I traveled. I started living in Tigray in Meghalaya in 2018, in the summer of 2018. So it was kind of by choice. I moved from Addis Ababa. In fact, at the time, the reason I moved to Tigray was partly because I want to live there, because I was not brought up in Tigray. So I wanted to see the community. I would like to have a very close, like, kind of personal observation of how things look like. And it was obvious for anyone to see, like, things were not going well. So I wanted to be there at that time. Not that I expected this kind of crisis or this kind of siege and everything. But it was kind of, I went by choice. But after that, of course, the decision was not up to me after 2020. There's no, there was no option to go out even if you wanted to. So in that case, I was blockaded and I was sieged personally, as well as my people. Well, those were very trying times. So, like, even, for example, if you start from the food stuff that you buy, let's say the traditional cereal, teff, a small family would at least buy 25 kilos, at least someone who can afford it. I can consider myself as a middle class. So at least you'd buy 25 kilos or 50 kilos at a time. Whether you finish that, you consume it in a month or two. That's the average that you should buy, anyone with a decent income. So in those times, we used even to buy 10 kilo or something like for 15 days, because the price is high. There is so much uncertainty, and you can't do grocery stuff. You can't buy grocery stuff for 2 months or 3 months, depleting everything in your pocket, because everything, you can't predict stuff. Things like salt, which in fact I don't need for dietary reasons actually, but even buying salt is a big deal. Salt should be the cheapest thing. It's produced in this country, in Ethiopia, and even in Tigray as well, in the eastern parts of Tigray, you can find salt, but more from Afar area. So it should be the cheapest thing, whether in Afar or in Addis Ababa or everywhere in the world. I think most of the places I know, most of the countries I have been to, salt is not a big deal as far as I know. You can find it for a free on any table. You can ask any waiter to bring you salt, and you will not be charged, as far as I know, wherever the country you go. So getting salt was a kind of big deal. If you like buy 2 packs of salt and give one to your neighbor, that's kind of serious stuff. Like as if you bought and gave them a chicken or something like that. So you can imagine how stressing it was for people with meager or no income at all. No income at all, and most of them didn't have an income at all. Of course, even those people like me who have more connections outside, we have to get finance from outside, because you can't use your bank, you can't access your bank, or even if for a few months when the banks were letting us withdraw money, it was like a very limited amount of cash. They're trying to distribute whatever they have to as fairly as possible, to as many people as possible. And that's by registering it manually, because the database of the computer system, the banking computer system, has been locked from Addis Ababa. So they were even taking risk. They were taking administrative discretion. Otherwise, they're not even supposed to work, and they can't expect any kind of new cash inflow. So whatever, not only the food, even the cash had to be smuggled from outside, and then it will go away at the same time when you buy stuff that things we don't produce in Tigray, for example, cooking oil. So when you buy cooking oil for an exponentially high price, that cash is going out. So the contraband is not just the food stuff only, but the cash itself, the paper money. So the farmers have to sell their their goats, their sheep, their ox animals, farming animals. They have to sell those to get some cash, and for which they will have to they will have to sell them at a bargain or even at a very low price to get that cash, so that they can buy some sugar or whatever they need. Maybe clothes was maybe kind of a luxury because you wouldn't want to. But the consumption is a very priority. The priority was consumption. And besides that, there are IDPs. They are dislocated, so they probably don't have ID. They are in a different place. Half of them are from Western Tigray, hundreds of thousands of people in Makala, in Shara. You can see there are several, every school, practically every school in Makala has been IDP shelter. I don't know if half of them have been evacuated so that the students could start. Even those evacuated would be in a temporary makeshift shelter or in another school. So most of the schools are not operating fully, by the way. So those people may not have an ID. Even if they have ID card, the banks are not working. Their social ties are broken. So it's not like they have someone they can ask for a loan for just besides being human being and besides being a Tigrayan, they have a social bond, a social safety net on which they can rely on. So for them, it was a disaster, and it still is to date. In fact, even the humanitarian aid has been stopped for 4 months for reasons I don't really understand, due to the decision by WFP and USAID. So for that reason, I can't even imagine how they are living, even to date until now. So for the rest of the people, at least for the middle class and for kind of people who can have several means of income or who had a kind of reliable job, okay, maybe they are getting back in their feet. They have 6 months of banks opened, telephones open, so there are some transportations. But for the majority of people whose jobs have become lost, like small business, they are really struggling to restart, but to return to where they have been 3 years ago. And for the IDPs, there is no change at all. I don't see they see much a difference between now and last year, except for the absence of airstrikes and the drone strikes. I don't see there's a difference much for the IDPs.
Well, you described yourself as as member of the middle class, and I think that's a fair description, Daniel. But still, that didn't stop you from facing extraordinary economic challenge, and that raises the question of how profound the challenge and the difficulty must have been for people who are of the working class. And I think there hasn't been any really poll or research in terms of how what percentage of Malala population is middle class and what percentage of it working class and underclass. But I think it's fair to say that most people in Malala are working class, and if their income, if the source of income is interrupted, that is literally collapse immediately. And as someone who is very observant of his environment, very perceptive, very perspicacious of his environment, what are some of the painful experiences that you witnessed in Malala in terms of challenges that people had to endure?
Well, several things. For example, like you can't have transport. So, for example, I sat and started working. I've been working on my book most of the time, just to avoid having to commute. Actually, there's nothing to commute. There is no transportation practically. Like at least 90% of or 8% of the vehicles, taxi, and every kind of even private vehicles were not working, 80 or 90%. So there was no transportation in the first place. But there are people who are sick, who are ill, and all they need was to go to the hospital to check up and to follow up. Things like low white blood cell and stuff, things that you have to check up because your immunity is being weakened. So you are vulnerable to any kind of disease. I have neighbors like that. So they just sat in their house and they're practically praying, but they will not get sick or they will not die because they can going for checkup. I'm not even talking about people disabled, people with some kind of chronic stuff. Just people for which there's no medicine in the first place. But even those people who benefit from minor checkup and from minor medicines, they have to travel all the way to the hospital in the first place. And without transportation, or if the transportation is going to cost the family's food allowance, food budget of 3 or 4 days, if you have to pay hundreds of for a taxi, which is a big deal for much of the people, you can't afford to do that. And you know the tradition, no mother or no father would like gamble on the children's fate or food stuff and their needs. So they'll pretend they're fine, even if you know they're not fine. So that so I'm not talking about those with diabetes problem or something like that. With antibiotics, another doctor was describing that. I'm not much into medicine, but he was telling me like since the invention of antibiotics, this is the first time that several medical procedures are being conducted without the use of antibiotic in Tigray. So this like practically a century or 80 years ago, that's when antibiotic became a commonplace in medical procedures. So the doctors were saying like we are now acting like a witchcraft, like a traditional doctor. Not they're not using the medical expertise they're trained to, but they're trying to use their best judgments so that they help people. And the doctors themselves they have salary, by the way. The doctors, you can imagine having to treat people the whole day, and you don't have enough. You don't have enough transportation, and you don't have much food budget for yourself, let alone relaxation and other things, and giving medical treatment to people who are chronically ill or who have enough medicine for themselves is very exhausting, even emotionally exhausting, physically and everything, let alone that. So, let alone the patients, even the doctors. So, those doctors are our friends. We know them. So, it was like from the doctors to the patient who's just sitting in his house and like making a trade-off between his disease and his family's food budget. And there may not be much food in the house at all, because one of the problems with the urban poor is that the social bond is not as strong as the rural area. When you come urban life is kind of individualized. So you may have extra food, but you may not have it, and you may not know that. They could be silently dying. Actually, this happens in any urban area. So in that situation, when there is nothing, the urban poor might have suffered more than we know, more than that has been documented, because there's no way of properly gauging that. All you know that is the door is closed, your neighbor's door is closed, but you don't know whether they have anything at home.
Well, I presume you would have recounted some of these harrowing stories in your book. So, I'm going to invite my listeners to go read the book to really understand the magnitude of the suffering that unfolded in Tigray and still is unfolding in the IDP centers. They call them IDP centers for political correctness, but I prefer to call them concentration camps because the picture that I see, even from where I am, are really horrific. So thank you for that. So if you could get back to you, Daniel, and some of the decisions that you made. You said that in 2018 you decided to permanently move to Tigray from Addis Ababa, and part of your reasoning was that you didn't quite like what was happening in Addis Ababa in terms of the political dynamic. You suspected that something not good was around the corner, and that's part of the reason why you went to Tigray. And so first, what were your understanding then? What was your assessment then? What were the reasons that convinced you to move to Tigray? And second, when you moved to Tigray, I presume you had opportunities to have conversations with the Tigray leadership. And what was their understanding then? Did your understanding of the political dynamic there in Ethiopia match the understanding that the political leadership in Tigray then had?
Well, things were deteriorating in Ethiopia for quite a while, at least since the early 20 10s, 2013, 2014. We're seeing the trajectory, the toxicity of the conversation is increasing. And the various political forces at home and abroad in the diaspora were part of the mobilization, were part of the escalatory rhetoric, were very toxic, and we can observe that. So even when Abiy Ahmed came to power, a chunk of his support came from those forces. So you can optimistically think, you could optimistically wish that he will manage those forces and keep them at bay. But even if he did that, the political environment in Addis Ababa was toxic, and it was unwelcoming unless you have some kind of investment or some kind of vested interest to protect or to that force you to sit there, to live there. It was not uninviting, or it was not a welcoming environment. It was toxic, and it didn't feel safe anymore. And plus, you remember that's the May or June, not June 2018 public rally, which Abiy and his supporters organized, when like a bomb took off. That in that public rally, which the Western media shallowly praised and glorified as if it was some kind of display of civic solidarity or reformist movement, whatever. The placards were insulting Tigrayans. Tigrayans were listed on those placards, being called with photos, including mine, were being listed as daytime hyena and other stuff. So the list was not just of TPLF officials or Tigray government leaders. It was not just activists or people like me who are in the public sphere. Okay, that kind of okay. Well, you might justify it by that. Just some actors or some other people's figures. Anyone, any Tigrayan they found was on that placard with a photo. But there were several placards throughout those public rallies. So the toxicity had a sort of at least an official public endorsement or state endorsement at that time. So that's not the environment in which you want to live in. Otherwise, I traveled to Addis until November 2018, actually, for some business, for some affairs. But I didn't feel like living there after that. So, what the Tigrayan government or TPLF leaders had their perspective or their analysis was, they were seeing it in the prism of kind of state capture, developmental states, but they're seeing it more of as a national or as countrywide crisis rather than as one primarily targeting Tigrayans. Of course, they later started saying that, partly because the trend had become obvious, and they have no interest to deny it. Second, they want to appeal to the Tigrayan news as well, to the Tigrayan nationalists. So they are imitating those narratives or those concerns. But not that I'm not saying they are not concerned or they are not concerned, but due to their ideological indoctrination or due to their long-standing perspective or due to their prism, their worldview, that they wanted to see the problem as an altercation between rent-seeking or kind of problematic section of the people and the rest of the mass, which was not the case. It was defined along nationalist lines. So due to that analysis, they're expecting, they're hoping things will go around and will get fixed through the PRDF platform, the ruling party, the PRDF platform. It will be fixed through that platform through self-criticism, initial analysis, and kind of party reform. But nobody in PRDF was interested in preserving the PRDF, neither the prime minister nor the rest of the party, at least many of them. I don't know, we can't speak about all of them because half of them are opportunists, so they may not have any stand at all. They'll decide, they'll take their position based on political expediency. But the Tigrayan leaders were expecting that almost until mid-2019, at least, if not until the end of 2019, until PRDF was practically dissolved, they're under the impression, they're under the expectation that things will get fixed, things will be sorted out, and the institutional the decay within the APRDF and within the state, the Ethiopian state, will be resolved through that kind of engagement, through intra-party engagement and through the APRDF platform or some kind of thing like that. So that was their expectation. So they were aware of incidents, and they had no interest to deny it. I'm not saying that, but their prism, their ideological prism, their mindset, or their long-time worldview, the way in which they explain and see the way the political workings of Ethiopia was based on that understanding. So they were expecting that kind of solution to come through the PRDF. And they had a big trust or expectation in the PRDF institution, in the PRDF apparatus, and in the ANDF, the National Army. They have so much trust on that, as if those institutions, I don't know, but they had much expectation in those institutions, and they were expecting them to revert and to change course and to come to some kind of resolution, but that proved to be a fanciful thought.
Well, Daniel, the reason, well, at least part of the reason why I'm pressing you on this, on what the understanding and assessment of the TPLF leadership was in 2018, is because one of the accusations that a lot of people level at the TPLF is that the TPLF simply, or the people in the TPLF in the upper echelons of the party, simply didn't have an inkling or an understanding of what was coming, of the nature and magnitude of the problem in 2018. And that despite the fact that Abiy was very, very open with whom he was aligning himself. He was aligning himself with the ISAT people. And the ISAT people, as you know, had made that, at least that infamous broadcast of the call on people to go and annihilate Tigray, saying that the way to catch a fish in the sea is to drain the sea. That was one of their sort of rallying calls. And also we mentioned the genocidal call by Iskandar Nega. Essentially, his point was that the way to deal with the TPLF was what the Nazis did to the Jews in 1930s to get rid of the Tigrayans. And you had written about that. So despite a lot of warnings, despite a lot of what is the word? A lot of calls for the TPLF to wake up to what was happening, there simply wasn't any awareness on their part. And I think part of the reason he just briefly mentioned was that they were in a way blinded by ideology. They had too much trust in the ideology and in the system of check and balance that they thought they had in Ethiopia, that they believed, despite some people's interest to want to destroy Tigray, they thought that the system of check and balance, the supposed system of check and balance in Ethiopia will hold. But of course, it didn't.
Let me give you an example.
The reason I'm asking you is because I want to get an insider's view, because you had a unique vantage point in the sense that you had the opportunity to have discussions with them. So you really understood their workings, their assumptions, their understandings. So that is the reason why I'm really sort of pressing you to go into detail on this, because it's one of the questions that people really want to understand. What the hell were, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on YouTube, but what were the TPLF thinking in 2018?
Let me give you an example. If you speak to a conservative politician or commentator in America, and if you tell him about the income inequality or whatever kind of social or economic crisis in America, he will understand, he will accept that, he may not deny the facts, but his solution would be just free market or tax reduction or stuff like that, because his solutions are deeply entrenched in his strong beliefs on certain principles or on certain viewpoints. No matter what you say or IMF's recommendation, wherever country they go, their solution is structural adjustment, privatization, liberalization. those ideas could be good, but wherever they go, that's their standing point, that's their starting point. So they can only see and interpret and make recommendations for any situation from that perspective. That's the kind of problems the TPLF people had. Of course, they have the data, they're aware of the things, and they might even sense the trajectory. But when you come on that aspect, when about what the assumption of the trajectory might be, their thinking was impaired by two more factors, not by one more factor, which has two. But that's the trust they had in EPRDF itself and in the ANDF. So first, the way they, regardless of the data they get, they were aware, they knew what was happening. Even their own friends, their own appointees, everyone was being mistreated and being expelled or made to, was forced to leave from Addis Ababa and several parts of Ethiopia. So they had the data. Okay, then how they interpret that? They interpret the in the only way they knew, or in the only way they think that was right. So that's through their assessment of the class struggle perspective. So there's a class of decadent or rent seeker or whatever you call it across the country, and there is a mass which is a good, which is presumed to be good and fair and just whatever, and it does have vested interest in conflict and whatever. That's the kind of the running assumption in those kind of thinkings. So they are not interpreting things along nationalist lines. So whatever happening to Tigray must have been happening to Oromo or to Amara as well, or it's going to happen, or at any rate, it should be seen in that context. That was kind of their thinking. So they couldn't particularly emphasize this aspect of the problem. So besides this ideological or mindset, mind frame of underpinning their thoughts, they had an unrealistic expectation or trust in the EPRDF's capacity and in the NDF's capacity to serve as a bulwark of destructive forces and to kind of to help us stabilizing force, something like that. So that was the kind of their thinking, much of their thinking, until Abiy practically dissolved the EPRDF. So almost by that time, by mid-2019, by the end of 2019, they started looking at other options. Even at that time, they're trying to form a federalist alliance with other political parties in the country. But there was no political parties in Ethiopia. There are no opposition parties, practically. Most of them are name only. So actually, the TPLF or EPRDF made sure there is no much opposition party in the country in the first place, or civil society, or whatever we call it. So when you want to form an alliance, there's not much to ally with. Most of them most of them carry their stamps in their pocket. So it's not really an alliance. It was more of a show of force in kind of contest, kind of to create your own. It was a kind of desperate move. There was not much realistic chance gathering 50 or something political parties, opposition political parties from Ethiopia. Wouldn't much be a difference anyway. But that was enough to make Abiy panic, and he blocked many of them from airport from coming to Mekelle, going to Mekelle, and some of them were arrested when they returned. So after that, by late or mid 2020, that's when they practically started training a couple of battalions and some commando forces. But that was too little too late. By the time the war started, we had like around 18 battalions, like some 9,800 trained special force. Yeah, what do you call special force? Regional force. So that's what less than 10,000 soldiers or special force, whatever you call them. But I don't want to confuse the audience. It's common to call special force regional special forces, but they are practical anti-riot forces. Of course, they might have a better training, and try to give them better trainings. Even in Oromia, in the Amhara, is being done. They do that. But the term special forces is not in the sense that the military special force or special commandos. It doesn't mean that. It's just a word commonly used in Ethiopia. So they really started for the ultimate, for the eventual war. They started preparing for that by mid-2020. So they couldn't prepare more than 18 or something, 20 battalions, which is multiplied by 400, it will be like around 9,200 or 9,800 people, combatants.
Well, I think in terms of them,
but in a way, I don't know what they could have done if they understood earlier. But one thing that I can see is that they could have prepared a larger, better equipped, and better trained, at least better trained combatants. That they could have prepared that. Second, they could have prepared several plans for war, for economic and other things. Because if you are going to a war in a way, you have to have several plans, war games, and see. Third, they could have tried, and they should have tried to create an alliance with forces that matter, like the international community, or with forces in the neighboring countries. Because, as I said earlier, the Federalist Forces Conference, which is a collection of opposition parties who don't have a serious presence, a serious current presence in the country. There are, I think, 80 or something political parties in the country. Most of them are meaningless. Almost 50 of them were gathered in Mekelle twice. But after the conference, they don't have much impact. They don't have constituency. They don't act much. They don't mean much. It was just posturing. So instead of wasting your energy on that, maybe you can try to reach into some kind of coalition with forces like OLF or ONLF. That's one option. Another option would have been to deal with neighboring countries and with the Western community, with the international community. That could have made a really important difference. In the military wise, they could have prepared a larger army if they had came to their senses earlier. They could have made a diplomatic offensive much earlier. And if you have to make dealings politically inside the country, you could have looked for other rebel forces who have serious foot in the ground, even if they are not rebels. They should have picked a couple of political parties with much better constituency and brand and reputation, and make whatever negotiation that's needed, instead of gathering some 50 useless opposition parties into a conference for 3 days.
Well, I mean, Daniel, you say what they could have done. I think some of the things that have become very clear, at least with the benefit of hindsight, is that number one, they were criminally underprepared, logistically and in every other respect. But despite that, they were very heavy on propaganda and very, very light on actual preparation. Like I said, criminally underprepared. And also, it doesn't look like that they had made their best effort to try to convince the international community to understand their point of view, to understand what Abiy and Isaias were doing. So I think they were found wanting in terms of those respect, and a lot of other things. I think a lot of discussion could be had about that, but in a way there is no point in getting bogged down in what they could have done, what they should have done, what they didn't do, and stuff like that. Of course, it's an important discussion insofar as lessons could be drawn, but it's not really my focus for today. So in 2018, you go to Mekelle, and a lot of things happen. Tigray holds election, and then the war breaks out in November of 2022. And your name is put on hit list, like I said, by the Abiy regime, and drones and jets start raining down bombs in Mekelle. And I want to understand how, what he felt as a human being, not as a politician, as a commentator or stuff like that, but as a human being who finds himself in the midst of this. What do you feel? I mean, in the book you say that it forced you to go into contemplative reflection, I believe. But I don't know how you go into contemplation when the things that I mentioned are happening on a daily basis. So I'm not trying to psychoanalyze it, but I want to understand that the human emotions and feelings that you went through.
Well, actually, that phrase was meant to be. There is the destruction of the digital era, right? I have been like on every social media like for the past 10, 13 years. Okay, if you deduct the 3 years, at least the decade before 2020. I was not much online in the past 2 or 3 years. So you can't really concentrate and write or not even we don't even have time to read anymore. Like there's a message, there's a notification on your phone, a notification on your laptop and stuff, and phone calls and everything. So that distraction was in a way avoided. So that kind of helped me to concentrate and into doing stuff. On the other hand, of course, there's an emotional turmoil. Even if you don't hear any news, even if you don't have any new data that day, and even if you don't hear any kind of jets, military jets go by at any time, but you can simply assume the worst or what's happening, even totally generally to my people, and in particular place as well. In fact, your imagination goes wild. You will be better off if you have much information of, if you get enough information of bad things rather than not hearing anything at all. Because when you don't hear anything at all, you imagine the worst. Uh, so of course there's that emotional turmoil. But at the same time, so the contemplative retreat part was, I was kind of there was another face to the coin in the people. Is that I said the another side of the coin would be, it was a quiet, or when I say quiet, kind of much of the digital distraction was not there. Otherwise, if that was the case, I wouldn't have written a book. I should have written years ago. So this gave me the energy, the pressure, the urge, and at the same time, the kind of focus or concentration to work on something. And of course, I have to manage between that because, by the way, I have an experience with this kind of crisis. For example, during the Oromo protests, I'm not comparing that with this one, but I was like reporting a crisis every day. A demonstration somewhere, someone got killed, or property got distracted, or some vehicles are stranded, whatever. So I remember following that kind of news for months was kind of traumatizing. But I'm not comparing that. I don't know. I didn't know what trauma is until this time. By the way, I'm not making any kind of equivalence. But when you work for a long time, like as a journalist or as a media person, you learn how to manage those kind of shocks or those kind of gruesome stories. Uh, so maybe that might have helped me. I don't know. Otherwise, I can't explain. But other people with less education or with less exposure than me, even women, have been managing through this. During the siege, we used to sit and chat with women and with others. Kind of, but I'm not being here. I'm not putting some kind of stereotype on women, but they are kind of more sensitive and they know several things about their children and their family. They are more emotionally sensitive, or their emotional intelligence is better than ours. That's what I'm assuming. I'm sorry if I'm being politically incorrect here. So they're managing that. They're coping up with that. So maybe that's in my DNA. So because whenever we meet during the siege, whenever we meet someone in Makala, we're not talking about some kind of disasters or some kind of atrocity. We're talking about other stuffs, about the city, or about some kind of just small talks. Not that the minute someone came and broke some kind of news, everyone was expecting that about a war, about some kind of military strike or jet strike, about drone strike that happened just 6 hours ago. But when we meet, we are not talking about that. But when someone with an information comes and everybody's ears, so that was that was in everyone's mind. But we're not sobbing or something all the time. We're kind of coping up with that. I don't know. I can't say whether we're pretending, we're suppressing it. Maybe we're suppressing it. So that's kind of that comes with a long experience experience of trauma, even as a society. So I probably learned that from the community, maybe. So that's what I can say.
Well, then you say that there were times when you feared that the worst could happen, and by the worst, I presume you mean death. With or of course there was from what you're saying, but
About the wanted list.
What were the times when you felt that death was really real, that it could be imminent? And I also would like to understand what does it does to you as a human being when you know that you could really die. I mean, we know that our life is abbreviated in general, but when you know that you could really die next morning, your perspective on a lot of things change, I presume. So what was that like?
I don't know how to put that, and I'm not sure. Anyways, but let me give you 2 or 3 examples. For example, first, when in November 2020, before the capture of Makala, there was a military an airstrike near Aksum Hotel, if you recall, sometime in mid-November. So I was nearby. When I was with my friend, we were in a car, and like I was waiting him outside the car, and he went to a shop looking for something. The military jet was flying low. That I thought like it was going to hit my head. Like it's not practical, I know, but the sound was so nearby that I practically sat because I was trying to what you call dunk. I was trying to cover being hit. Just that was a reflex action. So I don't recall. I have been flying all my life. I have been near airplanes, but I don't think. And in the months after that, not because of that incident, there was also another incident. If you remember, Getachew Reda's house being hit by drone strike, it was like 2 blocks or 3 blocks away from my house. The interesting part is the day earlier, there was that drone strike on Dimtsi Wayyane's television. So since the people are there, the journalists are my friends, I was thinking, okay, I'll go the next day to check on them, at least to say how are you, and if they are fine, just to check, because there is no phone at the time, and I'd like to see if they are fine or if anyone was hurt. So I was planning to go the next morning around 10 a.m. in the morning. So by that time, there was a drone strike in Getachew Reda's house, which would be on my way if I went to Dimtsi Wayyane's television. Of course, I had not been hit. It was like 100 meters or something away from the road I was going to use, but it's still a risk. So I was wondering what would happen if I go. There are several roads because there's a road in front of his house and there's another road to the side. So I can't predict which side the taxi would have used, and whether I will have decided, okay, to check on Getachew, because if you recall, there was another second drone strike which killed people who went to Getachew house to look to see what's happening. There's first strike, after which Getachew left the house, and after 10 minutes there was another strike. In that strike, several people were killed. Those people were from the neighboring area. They were just they went there to see what happened or who was killed and stuff like that. So if I was passing through that road at that time, I might want to check on Getachew, or even the taxi driver might decide to stop by for a few minutes just out of curiosity. So those were interesting times, but I don't know how I can describe them or what I felt about it. But I think we're all resigned to the possibility that anything could happen. So we're not really thinking about we're not trying to process that information much. We're trying to live out of it. I think psychologists would be a better position to explain this phenomenon. But besides that, even after the Pretoria Agreement, I was not comfortable. Like whenever Ethiopian Airlines pass, it will take me a second to realize it was a passenger flight and they are not going to drop bomb anyway. So that's the kind of stuff I can explain. I can't explain much this kind of emotional stuff. I'm not good at it. Yeah. But about the wanted list that is described, the first time I saw the news, I was not more angry. I was just like being sarcastic and kind of sad because it was kind of petty and meaningless. The list of generals that were listed there, and the political leadership was listed there, and they go after journalists and activists like me. So, in a way, it's a way of trying to wipe out or to silence, to wipe out any kind of representation from the people, the representative, and to silence the people altogether. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Let alone me, even the people, but in any realistic scenario, they don't need to list all the TPLF Central Committee members, because who are you going to negotiate with the latter, or who is going to run the government? And why would you list all the generals? Some of them or generals and colonels. Some of them, I don't think they were active at that time. Actually, I know some of them were not, in fact, active at that time with the Tigray government security force, because it was just 10 battalion, and nobody needs all those generals to run 10 battalions. So, so some of them were not at that time actively engaged. Some of them you should wish to negotiate or to engage them. Okay, some of them might be, you might consider them as your distant enemies. So while that is kind of nonsensical, they went further to list people like me who have no military experience or who have an elected and unelected position in the government. So it was kind of a signal of the madness in which we are, rather than a personal directorate to me. Because as for me, anything would happen anyway, whether they put a list or not. It's not a country being run by law anyway. So whether putting my name on the list or taking it off from the list wouldn't make practical difference much in terms of how the security forces will operate. Of course, it will traumatize my friends, my family, and people who are close to me or people who want to contact me. They'll be like uncomfortable. It had that effect. It was like it had tremendous effect in that era. It affected me very much for sure. But if you think from the bigger picture, it was kind of the madness and the nonsensical approach, and kind of even genocidal. It's kind of the genocidal. But one of the definitions of genocide is trying to wipe out the entire elite of a people, a community. That's how you distract that people. Another would be another aspect would be to wipe out in terms of number as many people as you like. Of course, you may not. I don't know genocide in which all people were decimated, but of course you'll kill millions. And another approach to genocide would be distracting the essential foundation of that people.
Daniel, we'll come to that. Because you're touching on aspects that you have covered in the book. Now we'll come to that. No, thank you for reflecting on your personal experiences in that. And in a way, I have to apologize for putting you on the spot. It was impertinent of me to ask you deeply personal questions, because number one, you haven't really had time to reflect on what everything meant, and generally it's very difficult to reflect on these matters, and I think you struggle to reflect on that is palpable and totally understandable. But you mentioned the Pretoria Agreement, Daniel. What did you feel on when the Tigray, when the TPLF and the Abiy Ahmed regime signed the agreement? What was you feeling then? Because at least, regardless of the merits or demerits of the agreement, you knew that there wouldn't be drone strikes every day there had been until then. So that must have meant some relief. But also reading the content of the agreement, of course, you can't, avoid the frustration and even the anger. So what was your overriding feeling then?
Well, the content was not impressive, but I knew our combatants need a break. They have to take a rest and whatever to reorganize themselves. They have to take care of the wounded and they have to bury the martyred, and their IDPs, their evicted people due to the war or in the previous ethnic cleansing. So there are several things that need to be sorted out. So we need a break. And at the end of the day, I thought the document was political, not a legal document per se. So the way it was written, the way it was drafted, and everything was, and it was kind of pretty much obvious. It was not going to happen the way it was written there. So that I knew. So all I cared about was that we got a break, and all that matters is how we proceed from that. That was my feeling. So I was not much bothered by it, and I was not much enthusiastic about it. It was kind of a temporary measure that we needed. Similarly, the Ethiopian part needed that too, because they practically outsourced their army to Eritrea. Practically, the Ethiopian military force was under the command of what is the Eritrean military general? Philippos. So, in a way, the Berhane was trying to get his job back, because after trying to wage war through the South Tigray and through West Tigray, ultimately they gave up and started through the north in a combined force with Eritrea. So there were thousands of Ethiopia, 10,000 of Ethiopian army and Amara army, Amara special forces, general force. They're all in Eritrea land being commanded by Philippos, by the Eritrean General Philippos. So practically the Ethiopian military was kind of being emasculated. And they're losing thousands per day. They're losing their army, and whatever is left was not in their control. And they're worried about their fates, even if their force could succeed entering to Makala. They were not sure about what path Isaias would take after that. So they had their own calculation. They want to take a break and they want a temporary stop because it was not going well for them. And from our side, as explained earlier, it was a much needed break. So I understood the predicament of the situation. And at the same time, it was a political document and things were not going to go the way it was written, and it didn't actually. But at the same time, I was worried without the agreement, they have guarantors. But of course, America was facilitating and acting as a de facto guarantor, but didn't actually make a binding pledge or didn't sign on the document. So that was its major gap. And secondly, if we do not use the opportunities or the possible opportunities provided by that break or by that agreement, it will be a loss. But it will open a kind of forms that we can't control, just like the things we are seeing right now. It has become a kind of a long nightmare, 8 months or 10 months of no action, even if the break was a good thing, at least for the army, and for the rest of the people as well. It was not as productive as it should have been. So those were the dilemmas I had because I'm a law student and I have been following politics for long. So the minute I saw the Pretoria agreement, this was my assessment. I was not thrilled or nor depressed by it. It was something to be expected. In fact, when they went for negotiation to Pretoria, I pretty much expected something like this would happen.
Well, you say that it was well, still is a political document rather than a legal document, and I think by that what you mean is that it wasn't going to be implemented to the T. Rather, it left a lot of room for maneuver, and there is actually a lot of opportunities for Tigray if we, if Tigray found the right sort of political dynamic to exploit those opportunities. But do you think the Tigray leadership has been making the best use of those opportunities that you just mentioned?
No, no. But at the same time, I can't say if you ask me what those opportunities were. I can't give you a definite answer, or on issues I can give you a definite answer. It would not be right to make those statements. But the thing is, at any rate, the situation was supposed to create opportunity.
So Daniel, to elaborate on my question, one of the things that a lot of Tigrayans seem to have, arrived at a consensus on is that the political system in Tigray is fundamentally broken. And so that whatever opportunities the Pretoria Agreement might have presented to us, that there simply isn't any political system in Tigray to exploit them. I think that is one of the things that people are so depressed about, at least judging by the thing that a lot of people, very credible people, write on social media. So I'm trying to get you to reflect on that.
I agree with you, but we didn't use the opportunity before 2020 as well. Between 2018 and 2020, there are several opportunities we should have been using. I mentioned some of them earlier, military-wise, diplomatic-wise, and political-wise. Okay. Even during the war, we made mistakes in military terms, in diplomatic terms, and in political terms. Just like the Federalist conference conducted in 2019 and 2020, during the war last year, there was a Federalist and Confederalist alliance in Washington. I have no objection about that alliance, but most of them don't have active force on the ground, and there was no clearly crafted agreement or on the way forward that can convince and rally other people. So that was kind of a posturing, just like the previous time. And in diplomatic terms, for example, if you go to back 2020, between 2018 and 2020, the American politicians like Tibor Nagy, who are against us, were trying to paint Tigray as some kind of, or Tigray leadership, or TPLF, whatever you call it, in terms of economic policy. Of course, Abiy didn't make much changes as far as we see. There's no privatization, there's no structural change. The currency, the dollar exchange rate is still fixed and controlled by the government. There is no fundamental economic policy change. But they're trying to paint Tigray as opposed to economic reform. Okay, TPLF could have made some kind of statements to change that impression in the time before 2020, between 2018 and 2020. That could have made some inroads in the diplomatic arena. Okay. So we didn't make that changes. We didn't explore those options during the war, or if you did, it was very limited. So same thing, you have to explore those options. What are politics is making use of what's available, politics or diplomacy, making the best use of the opportunities presented. You don't have to invent, but you are not going to impose your will, your wish. If in that case, you are probably superpower. So there's that leadership gap, or that leadership crisis before, and I see it now too. So that's kind of an ongoing problem that I see, not per se as a new thing. Of course, there are new players in the game, but I don't think it's a lack of, I don't know, I see it as an ongoing problem. Having said that, sorry, James, what was the...
No.
Okay, so I see it as an ongoing problem. So I think that's where we are failing. Of course, the leadership is not cohesive, but it has always been like that. There was always kind of a power struggle in any situation. In fact, if you consider that, the situation in Tigray could be better than in the rest of Ethiopia, because they can sit in one room and debate as long as possible. The military leadership, the political leadership, and all of them together, they can do that. So they have that political capital, or that political experience, or that organizational culture that's still present, that can help them, sort things out. So there is that potential. Is the situation beyond their capacity, or didn't they get an opportunity, or is a lack of political will to make necessary decisions, to chart a new course, to take a new direction in terms of your political perspective, in terms of ideology, in terms of economic program, so that you can gather allies from inside and outside, whatever that needs to be done. Are they even talking about this stuff? Do they have time for this? So that's the kind of it's not being about being fundamentally broken. It's kind of at times lack of privatization. If you are occupied the whole day with petty affairs or with small affairs, with power struggle and daily routine tasks, you don't have time to make plans for mid-term or long-term. So, but that's kind of the political skill that's in Ethiopia.
Well, Daniel, we've kind of run out of time, but I'm going to force you to stick around to give us some ideas or some outline about your book, because I think it would be unfair to our listeners if we didn't briefly mention the book. So it's a huge book. I think it's about 500-page book. So I'm not going to ask you to summarize it because that would be stupid, really. But I'm going to ask you to give us an idea of what the book is about, so that people listening to us could get some idea about what the book is about to help them make a decision whether or not to buy and read it. So tell us briefly what the book is about.
Okay, the book from its inception was intended to be for primarily to be for foreigners and for second generation Tigrayans. But of course, even for me myself, writing the book and organizing the arguments and the data was kind of a learning curve. So, but I wanted it to be a document just because these things we have been going through this every 10 years or every 10 years, whatever. There's every generation. That is for the past 100 years or something. So I wanted it to be documented so the next time it will not come as a surprise or as something anomaly. Because the narrative in the Western media, especially in the beginning of the war, when I practically, that was about the time I started in 2021, the book. So at that time, the narrative was like, it was kind of some kind of anomaly, some kind of things that happened, a backslide of a reform, something unexpected and becoming of a Nobel laureate, or a kind of conflict between two political factions in the ruling party. That's how Tibor Nagy was trying to paint it. And no, that was not it. There is a fundamental issue in the making of the Ethiopian state. There is an anti-Tigrayan embedded sentiment or institutionalized culture. It's not just Amara or Oromo anything. The state, the making of the state is backstream created an institutionalized anti-Tigray rhetoric that sees everything, any sign of assertiveness or autonomy in Tigray as a threat that have to be crushed or squashed with genocidal measures. That's the making of the state and the narratives. And besides that, I wanted to show the trajectory for the past 2 decades, how the narrative, the anti-Tigray rhetoric, and the force alignments was building up. So then it comes to the 3 years and it shows how it progressed month after month. So if I put, and I also tried to analyze the Eritrean aspect, how they contribute, how and why they were engaged or they become vested actors in the genocide. And I also tried to explain the dismembering Tigray. The Western Tigray is not just kind of disputed territory. It's a stepping stone. It's a means to make Tigray an unviable entity, an unviable political entity. It's part of the genocidal project. So those are the arguments that I have tried to set or to present with enough adequate arguments, citing this and data. So it's not just me rambling like just my opinions, but I try to put as much concrete evidence as possible so that anyone can debate or can challenge those arguments because there's enough of them there. So with that the objective or the overall objective would be showing the picture, the genocidal character of the war, not just by the incidents, but by the motives that went to the war, by the alignments that were created for the war. And those alignments and those motives and those rhetorics were not an anomaly that suddenly popped up in 2019 or 2018 or 2020, or by a sudden surge of ethno-nationalism, but it was creeping up for decades, and it has taken up before in another forms. So that was a kind of picture that I want to set for the recap, because this is going to happen, and we don't know this month, we don't know whether it's next year or next decade, but the cycle of destruction is going to continue. That's obvious, because there is no resolution of conflict. We don't see that, whether in Ethiopia or in Somalia or in Sudan. They are all frozen conflicts. And in Tigray experience, we have seen it like 3 times at least since in the past half a century. The siege, the use of famine as a weapon, and stuff we have seen, and aerial bombardment, indiscriminate killing. We have seen it at least since the World War II in the past 60 or 70 years. This probably is the third round, I think. Third or more round, third round. So it's likely to happen again. And whether when people record the history or when they try to analyze the next round, whenever that happens, whether it's in our lifetime or after that, I wanted them to have a perspective, a frame from which they can start to analyze or to speak about the situation. Because I don't see a real peace, a lasting peace, at least positive peace, not just silencing guns, which is a very mediocre objective of African Union. I don't see much a creation of lasting peace or sustainable peace besides just negative peace, silencing gun in the years to come.
Well, Daniel, one of your contentions in the book is that what Eritrea and Ethiopia have done in Tigray amounts to genocide. Of course, as you will know, other bodies like the UN, the AU, the African Union have refrained from calling it genocide for understandable reasons. I think the closest that they have come is the investigation by the UN team of experts is published couple of, I think, 5 days ago, and one of the points the report makes is that androcide, so androcide is deliberate targeting of men and boys, and one could argue that that amounts to genocide. But generally, there is a tendency to not want to call it genocide by the international community, and it's understandable. And also because the Tigray government has sort of buckled under pressure, they're not calling it genocide. I don't remember they ever called it genocide, anyways. So it's a very important contribution that you have made. You have laid out the arguments for why you think it's genocide. And as I said in my introduction, we're going to have another discussion. We're going to focus on the book. So I'm going to try to have you on next time, Daniel, to exclusively discuss the book. Today it was more, just meanderings about various issues, but I think our listeners would find them important, the issues that we raised. So if you have something that you want to add, I'm going to give you that opportunity, but otherwise that from my side.
I think I said pretty much. Thank you, Taglai, for the opportunity.
It was my great pleasure, Daniel, and to our viewers, if you like what we do, as I always say, don't forget to like the content, to subscribe to the channel. I think that helps us grow as a community, and to share it around with your friends. And thank you for staying with us today. Until I see you next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.